All right, we are now live. Over to you, Nandini.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm so delighted to welcome you to this CETI's inaugural Enchanted Technology Summer Festival, and the series of amazing conversations we're having with all these wonderful speakers that you're going to see. This Enchanted Technology Festival is focused on wearables and costumes, and we have a series of workshops, speakers, projects in our amazing lab. By the way, I'm Nandini, and I, along with many other people, including Helen and others, am one of the founders of CETI, a Creative and Emergent Technology Institute. We now have a beautiful lab, which is what prompted us to do some of this. And you can find out more about us and how to join us at our website, ceti.institute. Our social media is all ceti.institute as well. And all of these talks are going to be streamed on YouTube, and we will edit and caption them soon for you as well. And to find out who's more of the speakers, we have it all on the website. Sign up for our newsletter for more projects. But before I start and hand it over, I wanted to mention a couple more things. One is all of this is possible with the very generous support of the Oregon Community Foundation and of Portland State University, which has given us this beautiful space, and of many people. You'll find them on our website who are teaching, mentoring, helping set up the lab, speaking. This is a community project, and hopefully you will soon be part of this community. So today we're going to have Crystal Cortez join us, an amazing sound artist, and Helen will tell you more about her, and Helen Lee, who's this wonderful artist, music person, just does so many amazing things with electronics and technology, but also like amazing at putting all of this together so quickly. And she's going to be moderating this conversation. And so I am going to leave you all to just listen to these very inspiring artists working with sound and technology in amazing ways. Talk about their work. So I'll leave it to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nandini, and thank you for pulling this program together. It's been an absolute joy to work with you on this. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce you all to the fantastic Crystal Cortez. They are a sound artist and creative technologist who's based out of sunny Portland, and she's also an educator and lecturer who works at the Portland Community College. I have heard so much about Crystal's work, so I'm really excited to hear what she's been getting up to and to see some of the creations that she has blessed the world with. So without further ado, here is Crystal. Hi.
Hi, thank you both for the introduction, and thanks for having me as a part of this festival. I'm really excited to be a part of it. You guys have had a lot of exciting workshops so far, and I hope everyone keeps up with the schedule and attends everything, because it looks like a really great schedule of stuff. So thank you.
Amazing. I would like to say that if you are watching this now, you can comment either on the YouTube comments. I'll be able to see it and highlight your comments. And so any questions that you have while Crystal is talking, just pop them in the comment section, or you can also just at me on Twitter, and I will, at the end of Crystal's talk, I will be asking all of your questions plus some of my own. So if you have any burning questions, just pop them in there. I will ask them at the end. Okay. Go on.
Thank you. Yeah, and I encourage you, if this is all completely brand new stuff to you, there's no question too small. I'm definitely happy to go into anything that sparks your interest during the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Or are we already shared at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm going to go into my presentation. I do have some slides for you, which I will get to in a minute. This talk is called The Body as Interface, because recently in my practice, I've been really focused on how to use the body as the primary source of generating sound, rather than being kind of stuck behind the table as a lot of us electronic music producers are. So I've developed a number of instruments over the last few years that help me get closer to that I'll talk about. But in more abstract, I'm just going to talk about my work in general. So this is my website. I do a lot of different work with technology and sound and installation. And I love to use unconventional controllers. So I use a lot of different things to get data to control sound, and you can look at some of those projects here. My most recent installation was called Sonic Blooming. This was a plant biodata sound walk sponsored by Portland Parks and Recreation. And for this installation, I took the electrical impulses from the plants at the Rose Test Garden while they were in bloom and translated that into MIDI data that I could then turn into music. I'm going to talk more about this project in the presentation, so I'll come back to this Adaptive Instruments project, but this is kind of the beginning of my experience with wearable technology and this whole concept of the body as interface. I have been involved in this initiative, Community Power Pods, over the last couple of years, or over the last year, really. But this is something that you should check out. They have an Instagram called Community Power Pods, and this is solar powered generators available to the community by request, especially for activism events. So I encourage you to check that out. I also work at PCC, as they said in the introduction. I am a full-time teacher in both the creative coding department and in the sonic arts department. So I teach in both of those areas, and I'm also the director of the spatial audio residency, which is being in charge of this insane 32 speaker system that we have at PCC. So a speaker system of this size is referred to as a high density loudspeaker array. And what's special about it is that it's able to produce 3D sonic environments. So what we get to do at PCC is have students who have had an introduction to some basic programming in Pure Data or Max MSP make compositions for these 3D sound installations of 32 speakers. And there's going to be a lot more opportunities to engage with this system this year as well. So I bring that up just so you can keep an ear open for those opportunities. Let's see what else. Whatever Space. Whatever Space is a makerspace that I co-founded here in Portland. We started out with a physical location about 2 years ago. The physical location is now gone because of quarantine and just not being able to afford rent. But we are still doing online workshops in all things electronic music, creative coding, and open to much more beyond that going forward. But we're running these workshops online. They are sliding scale, so they're a lot more affordable than potentially enrolling in the college and taking a lot of similar topics in that setting. So both of those options, I do teach at Portland Community College a lot of those topics, but we also offer them pretty frequently at Whatever Space. So things like Pure Data, processing, microcontrollers, basic synthesis, modular synths, stuff like that are all of the types of things that we have offered previously through Whatever Space, which really functions as kind of like a collective that offers these workshops. Further on, we get some more into some of these movement-based and wearable technologies that I've done. So I'm going to talk more about those, so I won't highlight them. You can see some more of my larger installation work. Mass Residue was a large collaborative installation work at the Cave Gallery in Vancouver. It employed a lot of sensor-driven sound art. And this installation, if you want to come back to it and take a look at the video for this one later, this is Body Image Limited, which was at PICA. And this was an entirely wearable-based installation where people could come in and engage with all these different pieces of wearable technology that me and the collective made, and it would drive the entire experience of the installation. This is another piece that I will reference. This one's called the Elemental Altar. It's the first microcontroller interface that I built on my own. So this one uses a flame sensor behind the candle. It uses a water sensor in the cup, and then it uses a vibration sensor on the crystal as well as a distance sensor in the front, so people can engage with this, and it's a sculptural interface. So it's kind of my introduction to creating some of these unusual ways to control sound. So enough about the website. Let's go back into talking about the body as an interface. So I think one of the most interesting parts about making music or making sound art is deciding how I'm going to communicate with the computer. In other words, what interface am I going to use? And I always find it interesting to just look at the definitions of these words that we throw around so often in technology. So an interface, if you look it up, has two main definitions: a point where two systems, subjects, organizations meet and interact, and computing-based definition, a device or program enabling a user to communicate with a computer. So that's a pretty expansive definition. I think when we think about interface, most of us think about the most common types of musical interfaces that we have access to, which are typically things with the limitations of having knobs, sliders, buttons, or keys as our really only ways to interact with the computer and to control sound. But this type of range of controllers that we have currently, or that are used most often, I find limit my personal expression, and maybe you have as well. But I think they also limit our ability to feel embodied in that communication between human and computer, especially if you're an electronic musician and you know the experience of being at a table and just having to look down, right? It's much more embodied and interesting to me to be able to use my body in performance to control the sound. And I am very concerned with specifically the element of performance and making that feel as present as I can. So that's part of the motivation behind all of this work. So essentially my goal is just to remove these communication barriers between the body and sometimes the natural world, as you saw with the plants project, and the music software, or whatever software I'm working with at the time. So I want to go back a little bit to a couple years ago when I really started getting inspiration for this type of work. And it was really surrounding this collaboration that I was lucky enough to lead between Portland Community College and the Portland Art and Learning Studio. So if you're not familiar with the Portland Art and Learning Studio, they are an artist studio in Northeast Portland for artists with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So it's this amazing, huge studio space where artists can work on whatever their craft is at this studio. So there was a collaboration between PCC's creative coding department and that studio to work with a handful of artists from PALS and create instruments specifically to the ways that their bodies and their minds like to work. So we had a series of meetings with the artists that we were going to work with. We did some rapid prototyping of ideas. We had them play with those things, and then they gave us feedback on what they liked and what they didn't like about the things that we were making. And then at the end of the day, we came up with these final instruments. And this is very specifically based on the artists that we were working with and the way that their minds worked and their bodies worked. So we ended up with an auto-scaling touch synth. One of the main points of feedback that we got were that dexterity was an issue with a lot of the more typical controllers that people were working with music software. So you have to apply a pretty good amount of pressure to a lot of those controllers. So we developed a couple instruments that were really easy to just barely touch and control. So the touch synth and the interactive drum sequencer both had this kind of really delicate touch capacity. The drum sequencer also had pressure sensitivity. So if they wanted to apply a lot of pressure, they could, and they could get some interesting reactions that way as well. We also made a rotation detecting headband, which is something that I'll show you today. This was for some of the artists who didn't have as much mobility in their limbs, but they could control music with their rotation of their head or the movement of their head. And then a handheld 9 degrees of freedom controller, which means that it can detect pitch, yaw, and roll, so it can detect rotation as well. So this is wireless and handheld, and you can control basically any parameter that you're mapping it to with just holding it in your hand and moving your hand. The last instrument was made with the Xbox Connect, using that camera to do skeleton tracking and then allowing people to use their body really in whatever way that they felt like moving to control some melodic instruments. So this project really inspired me that toward the idea that you could make instruments that catered to the way that your personal brain and the way that your body worked. And I've been running with that idea ever since. So in talking about this project, I wanted to share with you some of the initial visits that we had and some of the rapid prototyping videos, just so you get an idea of what this process was like. And let me know in the chat if you aren't getting any sound. This will be my first try at testing sound today. Okay, so this was that one was a prototype of the touch drum synth that I showed in the previous slide. It did not have the touch capacity or the pressure sensing that we ended up putting into it, but we learned from this visit that that was essential. It also used the camera to adjust the speed of the sequencer, so the artist could move their heads or bodies left to right, and the camera would recognize and speed up the sequence. We found that visual feedback in the program and camera feedback was really useful to the specific artists that we were working with. So there was the hardware instrument development side, but we also developed software for these instruments as well. And we primarily used Max MSP for that. This is a video of the first prototype of the headband synth that detects head rotation. And this one is the hands-free 9DOF controller. Okay, so those were some of our initial visits where we were trying these things out, and we learned a great deal from them. And just wanted to share with you that process and how I found how fruitful it could be to really work one-on-one with individual people to develop interfaces rather than trying to make interfaces that fit the masses, which is a great goal to strive for, but can be really difficult. So I really like to empower people through talks like this and just through getting the word out about microcontrollers and coding in general, that you can either make your own stuff or you can start to get to know people around you that can help you make your own things that work specifically tailored to you. I want to also highlight another main source of inspiration for wearable technology. Maybe some of you are already familiar with them, but this is Pamela Z, and this is another person who I saw really take wearables into performance and make a big difference in the way that impacted the way that they perform. So I'm going to have us take a quick listen to some Pamela Z as well. pause and just show Pamela Z, because the first time that I saw this work, I just thought it was pure magic. And now that I understand some of these things, it's even more inspiring to have seen this, and it was really the moment where I realized that you could still be an electronic music performer and you could be embodied on stage. So check out Pamela Z if you're not aware already, but I'll showcase some of the similar sensors to what they're using in this video too, as I talk more about the specifics of movement-based and wearable technologies. So I'm going to get a little bit now into the stages of thinking about developing a wearable piece or a movement-based piece. And I've boiled it down to these basic steps. Again, thinking at all levels here, whether you've been introduced to making your own microcontrollers or not. So the first thing, of course, is how do you want to control sound, and who do you want to be able to control it? So this is a part where you're deciding, if it's wearable, what part of the body do you want to be able to control sound? Or if it's based on movement, what environment do you see this being performed in? Are you needing a sensor that's going to be able to track you from very far away? Or can you use something that's going to be just isolated very close to you? Thinking about who you want to be able to control it is really important as well. If you're thinking about building something that you would love to be able to hand to absolutely anyone, then you have to really consider the different abilities that people have physically and cater to that if you're making it for somebody else as well. So once you've identified kind of what part of the body or how you want to control sound, that's when you get to sensor selection. And there's really sensors for anything that can produce data, essentially. So things that sense light, things that sense movement, rotation, that collect biodata. Think of a lot of the sensors that are used on you in the hospital. There's a lot of people who use those things for art as well. You can use things like pressure sensors. You can use computer vision, which is essentially just using any sort of computer camera. And the options are really infinite from there with sensor selection. I point out Adafruit as a great place to start. Adafruit's wonderful because they have a wide range of sensors, and they're really focused on kind of the artist or hobbyist who is interested in using sensors in art. So they're a great place to start to look at sensors. There's often sample code on their website as well to get you started in programming the sensor, and often tutorials as well. They have a great explore page too, where you can just look at pages and pages of projects that people have made for inspiration. So point them out for step 2 and step 3. So microcontrollers is the next step. You need to have something that goes between the sensor. So whatever you've chosen as your sensor, let's say it's a light sensor, you need something to communicate between your sensor and your computer. And that's what a microcontroller is. There are many different kinds of them. These are all, these are also available on Adafruit. You can find a lot of them there. And there's a lot of different kinds of microcontrollers, but most of them will work for you. Teensies is a really good place to start if you're just searching. Once you identify how you want to control your sound, pick your sensor, find your microcontroller, then you have to code the sensor. And this is the step where you figure out how you're going to use this data. So if you need to remap the type of data that you're getting from the sensor, if it's not in a range that works with the software that you're going to be sending it to, this is where you change that. This is also where if you're going to make something wireless, you would set that up. If you're going to change it to a MIDI range, you can do that here as well. There's a lot of things you can do in the coding stage, but at the most basic level, you're preparing the sensor data to go into whatever software that it's going to end up being put into. And then the next step is really one of the most fun. This is parameter mapping. So this is deciding what parameters within your software your sensor is going to be sent to. So thinking about, let's say you have a rotation sensor. So you are playing with the sensor and you're seeing how the data performs. You see that you get a ramp up from, let's say, 0 to 127 when you turn it this way, and just thinking about what parameters of your software that would be a good performative tool with. Maybe it's the cutoff frequency of a filter, or maybe it's scaling up and down a keyboard. So figuring out what makes the most sense between the type of sensor that you're working with and the parameters that it could potentially control is one of the most interesting parts, and what probably also takes the longest in figuring out what to do with the controller that you've made. This is the part that's really the most interesting for me. I'm less of a developer of instruments that I'm trying to mass produce and put out into the world, and I'm more of someone who's interested in making these devices for specific programs or installations or performances. So they're very specific to a situation, and I'll typically make a different program for every performance that I'm doing or every installation. It might use the same sensors, but I'll use those sensors to be mapped to different parameters for each performance or installation that I do. So I put here a list of some of the most common programs that I will send data into. So Cycling 74, that's the website for Max MSP, which is an audio programming software, but it's also much more than that. You can also code visuals, lights. It's really an infinite tool. There's also Pure Data, which is very much related to Max MSP. It's kind of like the free version, or what Max MSP started out as, is Pure Data. So that's free if you're trying to get into that. Processing is another program primarily focused on generating visuals, but a really interesting program and free as well. And then other music software. So you could send this data into Ableton or other music softwares that you use in your practice already. The last step that I think about is enclosure design. And sometimes I don't go too deep into this part, as I'll show you. This is a 4-directional distance sensor that I've made. There's not really an enclosure for this. I'm just going to check the camera to make sure you can see this. Okay. So I kind of don't work too hard on the enclosure part if it's just going to be for me, and I kind of aesthetically even like the look of seeing the sensors and the wires. But I have made some wearable pieces that have more of an enclosure. This is a vest that also sense distance. This is what I call the personal space bubble vest. I've actually programmed it so that it makes a pretty annoying beep sound if someone's within 6 feet of you, just kind of commenting on the pandemic, but I've used it in a couple different ways. But enclosure design is the last step that you'll think about. So is there something that you need to attach this sensor to, like in this case with the headband, right? If it is going to be a wearable piece, what clothing is it going to live on? So if all of this sounds completely foreign to you, I put just some visuals of what I just said as well. This is some common sensor types. So basically, again, anything that you can get data from is something that can turn into a controller at some point. And then from after the sensor, you need a microcontroller to communicate between it and the computer. Then you need to be able to code the sensor and the microcontroller to be able to talk to whatever software you're going to talk to. And then enclosure design can be something like this, just something that protects the microcontroller and the sensors. And then the resulting software, so wherever you're going to send it, is kind of the last stage that I think about. Okay. And yeah, just don't limit yourself on the idea of what sensors you can use. There are so many sensors out there that are used in our everyday lives that we can make really interesting art with and really interesting sound art with if we can get access to them. A lot of them are pretty inexpensive as well. You can find some basic sensors, some of them for like less than $1 sometimes. Okay, so before I show you kind of an example of some programming that I've done for these two instruments here, I'm just going to show you kind of a supercut of some of the wearable tech pieces that I've done. So I know that in the beginning, there's going to be the headband or a version of the headband that is controlling a DMX spotlight in a large installation space. You're also going to see this 4-way distance sensor being performed by 4 people. It's something that I used to bring to shows and ask just a random set of people from the audience to come up and perform with me, which is another thing that gets thought about in that previous stage. So who do you want to control this? That comes into play with the sensor design, but it also comes into play with the program that you make. You need it to be able to respond to really simple instructions, or I needed it to. So you'll see an example of that. You'll also see a wireless wearable piece that I don't have with me today, but these were some kind of like boxing mitts that would trigger sound whenever you hit them together, but also trigger light response as well. And then you'll see a couple more recent pieces where I'm using these things together. So I'll show this. Let me go into presentation mode. Okay, so as I said, a really quick supercut of those things that I've been talking about. All right, so now I'm going to go into Max for a minute and just show you an example of how I would set up a program with these sensors for a performance. So let's see if I can minimize this. Okay, so this is the main program here. It has the 4-way ultrasonic sensor going in these 4 number boxes here. So the data is being streamed in through each of these sensors. It's detecting distance. So it's sending out a beam of sound, reporting back how far away it is once it's hit something. So if I put my hand very close to one of the sensors, then you'll see that the one labeled front went down to like a really low number, 1 through 5, right? And that distance I can program to trigger something every time it happens. So I can say a range between 1 and 10 should do something, a range between 20 and 30 should do something, and so on. So I can program from each direction what should happen at different distances from that sensor, and that's what I've done here in this performance. So this is kind of a deep program in here. Could be cleaner, right? I'm going to show you anyway. So this is pretty wild. There's a lot going on here, but I have programmed for each of the sensors different reactions at every distance from it. There's some more kind of detailed communication going on. Because this is a performance and I don't want to have to touch anything in this performance, I've set up kind of rules within this program where once a certain sample ends, it triggers the volume of the headband to go up, so I don't have to turn the volume up of that. And once the entire performance ends, it turns all the sound off. So there's some programming like that in there too. In this specific program, what I'm doing is I'm using this sensor, since I'm just using it myself in this performance, to generate kind of this ambient field recording soundscape to go behind the performance. I'll turn the volume up on that right now. And then let me turn the volume up on the headband that allowed me to really move my body and twist it around to get some of those other sounds in the clip of the video you just heard. Okay, so that's kind of what the headband was performing. I also have it set so that certain distance from the sensor trigger completely other more rhythmic elements. Let's see if I can get that one to happen. Yeah. So that one I just have programmed if I'm really, really close to the sensor. To this one specifically, I can have a certain reaction. There's a bit more going on here. I was working on adapting this piece to be able to be perceived binaurally. So that's where you can put on headphones and feel like you're in a 3D sound environment. So all of that patching is in here. And this is also set to control external lights. So change the dimness of a light or the colors of a light with the sound that's coming through, as well as you can see this video has been affected. So this might be something I project during a performance as well. So getting as many things controlled through these wearable and movement-based devices to create kind of an immersive experience was my goal with this specific set here. Let me go back into the presentation if I can find it. Okay. So I would definitely wanted to leave some time open in case anyone had questions for me. I want to encourage you all to keep in touch. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that there's going to be a Discord server where you can ask questions, but also feel free to reach out to me. I have my website that I showed you there. You can email me through that. I am available on Instagram as well, and you can find more of my music practice on Bandcamp too. So coming back into the stream here, I'm going to stop sharing and see if you all have any questions for me.
Let me add myself back in before I speak. That might help. Hi there. Thank you so much for that presentation, Crystal. It was a really, really interesting dive into some of your work. And I really, really enjoyed the practical tips that you gave us as well, including taking a look at your work stream. And there's anybody who wants to ask questions, who's watching, please put them in the comments. I'll be able to say them, or at me on Twitter and I'll be able to say them. But to kick us off, I've got a couple of questions myself, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, so I'm really interested in the development process slide that you shared there.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people will look at that and see it going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But do you ever get tempted to like jump in at the fun bits, or is that actually, do you go through it numerically? Do you start off with your selection, or is that just an ideal situation?
Well, I mean, yeah, there is some kind of back and forth that can happen, especially if you have a concept already for what your performance is going to be about, let's say. Like, so you have a theme that you're going with, then maybe you've already done some sound artwork, or like maybe you've already designed part of the installation, right? And so then you're kind of going back and deciding what sensors fit into a structure that already exists. But I really have been really interested in starting from the sensor for a while now, and really getting to know how it performs and then what that actually makes the most sense to map it to. But it's not all cases. Yeah, you can totally bounce around between that.
And so you say that you've got your preferred sensors, and I'm assuming you've got your favorite microcontrollers as well. And you did touch on that a little bit in your talk.
Yeah.
I'd be really, what are your favorite, top 3 sensors that you tend to use?
Definitely any sort of 9 DOF sensor, 9 degrees of freedom rotation sensors. Those are super useful, right? For everything. And then distance sensors of any kind, of course. I've used them nonstop in installations. They're really useful and they're tiny, right? You can kind of like hide them in an installation and get some cool interactivity without people really knowing how they just controlled something at first, right? So I love those moments where people in an installation especially get some type of reaction in the space that they weren't expecting, and then they kind of investigate and figure out where it's coming from and learn how to play with it themselves. So I think that's really cool, empowering people to get to know sensors. That's a really useful one for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun with those. And then another types of, I'm really interested in kind of the medical type sensors lately.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of medical sensors that you've been subverting for your own musical ends?
Primarily EEG sensors. So that's the kind that I used on the plants as well. But you can use that on your own, like muscles. You can put it on your arm. And there's just a lot of interesting technologies coming out through Adafruit that sense more of your biodata. There's the Muse headband that senses brainwave activity. That's a little more inaccessible, but it exists. And then there's ones that sense things like heart rate or like stretch. You know, I've played a lot with stretch sensors as well, so you can put them anywhere on your body.
Yeah. I was going to ask actually if you've done a lot, because it seems like your work would lends itself very well to that kind of stretchable thing. So when you say stretch sensors, can you tell people what you mean here?
Yeah, so there's a wide variety of different types of stretch sensors, but typically you get some type of stretchy material, and you attach kind of clasps at each end that you can send into a microcontroller, and you get the resistance. You're able to read the resistance from those types of sensors. So then you can attach that to anything that you're interested in stretching and getting the results of. But that's a really cool way to go about starting with a wearable as well.
Yeah. If you like for stretchable sensors, I've used all sorts of different knit fabrics, and you can get these really cool. I don't know what they're made of. There's some kind of carbon something, I imagine. But there's these black elastic bands essentially, and you can attach the clips, and they do and that's really fun. But yeah, any kind of like knit fabric or anything like that would be like amazing for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's maybe a little harder to find, but they have like capacitive fabric too now.
Yes.
So that's another thing that you can look for if you're really interested in making some like more clothing based projects.
Yeah. I'll just throw out the top link that I'm going to ask you actually, where you go to find your information. Like, so when you're doing your research or you get stuck on a project, like, what are your places on the internet where you will, or even in real life, where you'll go to help with your troubleshooting, to find tips, to find techniques, to find inspiration even. So yeah.
Yeah, of course. So there's a wonderful maker community in Portland. So I have a lot of friends that I've been lucky to meet, a lot of them through PCC, through the creative coding department there, but also just through kind of the weirdo experimental music scene here in Portland. A lot of those people are also makers. So I go to a lot of friends for troubleshooting because I happen to have that community. But also I think like the art of like electronic art is Googling. Like I think that is what this art is. So you don't need to know everything. That's the most important thing. I use a lot of sample code. I adjust a lot of sample code to my own purposes. These are a means to an end for me, and I love parts of this process. But I want people to know that there's people who are there to help you, that have made code that you can use, that you can adjust. I think I got trapped for a while thinking I totally had to know how to code absolutely everything and I don't believe that anymore. So
It's true. You're right.
yeah, so
I think that's a really important message to give to people who are just starting out on their wearable and DIY electronics journey is like the vast majority. Like I've been doing this for a long time, right? And I still copy and paste code from the docs. Like it's fine. That's what it's there for. You know, don't feel like you're a fraud because you're not writing every single line of code. You know, I know people who literally work in AI who are just like, no, we copy and paste code like all the time. Like, so don't feel like you're, you know, not good enough because you're not writing every single line of code, or that's what it's there for, and that's what this period of time is so exciting for.
exactly.
I've got a follow-up question here from Alana, who has commented on our YouTube stream saying, are there heart rate and oxygen sensors available on Adafruit, or is there somewhere else you like to get your sensors?
So there are heart rate. I'm working with a heart rate sensor right now from Adafruit. They have a couple different options actually. They have one that's more of like a wearable that's already developed, and then they have one that is kind of looks like a piezo, or a contact mic, if you're familiar with either of those things, that you can attach to like your wrist. So they have a couple different options. Oxygen sensors, I haven't looked for that, but I would venture to say they have something like that there.
They do.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. Adafruit's got all that kind of good stuff. I've also got a comment from Twitter. It's not a question, but there's a woman called Anita who has said, great stream, and she is watching all the way from Tasmania, and that she loves your work, Crystal.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. We've got another question here from YouTube. Joshua Clayton is saying, thank you, Crystal. I agree, thank you. During these times of teaching virtually, have you found certain types of approaches, materials, or tools have been more successful for teaching than others? That's quite a big question, Joshua. Blimey. Let's see if do you feel like you can take a stab at answering that?
Yeah. So I have been lucky in some ways in that, a lot of the softwares that we teach, or all of the softwares that we teach are made available to everyone who's taking the classes, which is at least bare minimum what we need is everyone on the same page. However, with online teaching right now, what's difficult is that not everyone has the same internet connection. Not everyone has the same computers. So it's not equivalent how people are able to use that whatever technology that I'm working with them. So I think as a teaching approach, what's been really important is figuring out for every assignment a bunch of different options of how people can complete that assignment with the limitations that they may have at home right now, because colleges are not, I would say doing enough to make sure everyone is technologically on the same page for classes that require heavy use of technology. So I think as a teacher, just adapting my expectations and getting creative about what are people really needing to learn out of this lesson, and what are other ways that they can achieve that with the technology that they have. And I think that having that is really interesting. You get a lot of diversity in projects at that point when people are starting to use technologies that are not the same across the board, or are coming at things from different angles. So that's been really cool to create community as well in classes, to see kind of what people do with the different tools that they have. So there's been a lot of ups and downs about online teaching, but it's actually gone pretty well over the last, year and a half?
Yeah, it's been that long. It has been that long.
Thank you for that, Joshua.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Joshua, and some really great insights there, Crystal. It's difficult, but we are making it work. So you touched on there was another question I wanted to ask you, which you did touch on the answer to this a little earlier. I'm really interested in the ways that artists work either collaboratively or independently. Mm-hmm. And from what you were saying earlier about the Portland maker community, it does sound that a lot of your practice is collaborative, or was that really like the learning was collaborative, but your actual projects yourselves tend to be just you working on them? Like, what's your process there?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is really foundational to my art making, for sure. So at all stages it has been. Before I got into technology, I was in a band, and we always had performance art elements in our stage shows that made the audience do things with us. Like I've always been interested in making as collaborative of a performance space or an art space as possible, which is why I got into creative technologies and figuring out that I could create these installations that you can literally make everyone a part of every aspect of the installation. Some of the actual development of these pieces end up being like me in a cave figuring everything out. But there's always times where I'm asking my friends things and we ask each other things. So it does feel like there's always kind of this flow of creative energy going between the people that I know. And especially in the last couple of years, I have also let go of the idea that I need to do everything myself, because I have seen proven to me over and over again, installations and pieces of art are much more interesting when you put a bunch of heads together, especially if you've worked together before and you know how to do that respectfully and well. So yeah, I love collaboration and random collaboration, like when I ran around with that performance piece and asked audience members all the time to do it with me. So I love it.
It's joyful. I feel like the collaboration brings so much joy and inspiration to your own, you know, private practice. It's lovely. So you mentioned that you were in a band before you started doing creative technology. I'm really curious now. What was your journey into tech? Like, I'm guessing that you know, if you were doing music beforehand, so this is like a career, like, or you know, like a practice switch, not switch, evolution, I should say. But I'd be really interested to hear what your journey into this realm of creative technology looks like.
Yeah, I was in a synth and saxophone duo for 5 years. We toured around a lot.
I love it. Okay, what synths? You got to tell me the synths. I need a little bit more detail here. And were you the sax player, or were you the were you the synth player?
No, I was the synth player. I would kind of play with whatever people would give me for a while. Like I had a lot of temporary synths. I still use the Virus B, which was the one that I've had for the longest, Access Virus. And yeah, it was just a really unorthodox band, a lot of performance art. I was doing that really heavily. We were like just starting to tour a lot more. I had a full-time job in arts nonprofits at the time. And I really just wanted to be doing art more, you know, like actually be doing the art. So I had a coworker there that serendipitously decided they were leaving that job and teaching at PCC. So I followed her and started going. I went back to school and went through the program that I now teach at PCC. So I went through the Sonic Arts and Creative Coding department, and I started teaching in those departments a month after I graduated. So it was just really quick, kind of unexpected. But I started out in the Sonic Arts department. I didn't know the creative coding department existed until they had an open house. And I just wandered in there and saw all of these insane projects that people were making, controlling like an LED wall, or, you know, making like a random object create all these sounds. And I was like, this is where I need to go. So then I pivoted and did that as well. And that's where I've been.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I've got another question from YouTube saying, all right, I need to know what each of your necklaces say, since they're both words. Is it a rude one? I'll start. Yeah. You can. Mine says, mine's a laser cut necklace that my friend made me, and it says immigrant on it.
Awesome. Okay, mine's a little more maybe bad. It says wet dream on it.
We could combine, and we could be the immigrant wet dream. That sounds like a really good band name.
Yeah, is a band name.
Of course it is. Of course it is. I love it. I love it. And I'm going to bring Nandini back in a minute, because somewhat improbably we've been live for nearly an hour. But I have one more question that I wanted to ask you, which was about your sound, really. We've talked a lot about your technology, we've talked a lot about your education practice, but I'm really interested to know what inspires the sounds that you make? You know, is it the previous talk to this, when one of the speaker, Sophie Wong, she takes a lot of inspiration from science fiction over the years, from science fiction fabrication. And I was wondering, because you do seem to have a sound, there's something about your sound that is, you know, cohesive. And I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about your intentions there.
Yeah, so I would say 90% of my sound or my instruments, I create them. They're all field recording based. So I think what you're hearing is like the consistency throughout my work is that I like certain sounds in the world a lot, and I bring them in over and over again. So I love the sounds of machinery, and I love the sounds of water and drops and like the tiniest sounds in our environments. I love all the tiniest sounds that exist in our environments. And so I'm making all of these instruments with field recordings most of the time. And then I do add some like synth and stuff like that in my music too. But I guess I'm trying to just create a full picture with my music of the world that I experience. So getting a lot of field recording, transforming it, synthesis.
For those people watching who don't know what field recording is, could you give a short description of what it is? Because I nodded a lot and then I was like, oh, you know what? Quite a lot of people probably wouldn't know what this is. So
field recording is basically the name of the practice of going out and recording sounds in your environment. So using like your audio recorder on your phone and recording a bird outside your house, that's field recording. Recording like the sounds of your washing machine, whatever. So just sounds in your everyday life and using them in music.
Awesome. Great description. All right, I'm going to add Nandini in back into the stream. Hello, Nandini. Welcome back. Welcome back. What an amazing talk, huh? Did you know? I learned so much. It was really interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
It was incredible. And I want to say, I lost, when you said, oh, I'm bringing on, I was like, oh my God, it's been almost.
I know.
I'm so sort of immersed in this amazing story you've told of your work, and it's just really powerful and inspiring. And so first, thank you so much, Crystal, for doing this and joining us. I'm also, and I'm hoping maybe I can chat with you later on the Discord about this fascination that you talked about the work with plants and now with like sensors on the body and this notion of capturing, you talked about field recordings, which is recording outside. And I think of these sensors as recording what's inside living things in some ways and using that in your work. So it's really fascinating. I'm sort of really curious where this work is going to go next. So
me too.
Yeah.
Does anyone? I'd love to. Oh, sorry. We're about to finish. We've got a few more. We've got 30 seconds left. But before we go, Crystal, where can people find you?
Yeah, find me on Instagram at Crystal Cortez. So Crystal and then Quartez. My website is crystalcortez.com. Like my name is displayed under my picture. And you can find me at Crystal Cortez with the Q.bandcamp.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Crystal. That was fascinating. In 15 minutes, we'll be live again with the roboticist and wearable technologist Jorvon Moss, who is a self-taught robotics tinkerer from Compton. He's a fantastic speaker, and I can't wait to hear about what he's been up to in recent years. Thank you for joining us for our second talk of the day, and a big round of applause to Crystal. Thank you so much again for joining us on this stream, and we will catch you in 15 minutes with Jorvon. All right, speak to you later, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.